Hello everyone, and I'm just creating another video, and it's to talk about the living story. Guild Wars 2 differed to Guild Wars 1 in their approach for the living story, which was designed to be regular updated content, and this video is going to talk about whether or not it was a success or a failure. So let's start off by explaining what the living story was. Originally, the developers wanted to, rather than create an expansion like they did with Guild Wars 1, they felt by updating it regularly that they could keep the players in-game rather than come in, play for a few months, and then leave and wait for the next expansion. With the living story, they were hoping that by creating regular new content, people would continue to play the game. So what was the first living story that came into Guild Wars 2? It involved the Karka, and it was a bit of a trial run, and it created a few issues that that have affected Guild Wars 2 the rest of their living story development. It did create some major problems. They created a new map, which was Southern Cove. Difficulty with that is that they just placed it in a random area of the map. It sort of in the mid, just off Lion's Arch, which seemed completely random to position it there. It's in the middle of nowhere. The next problem was that with regards to the living story, they had a specific time of day for their final event, and what happened, it would be an event starting at this specific time, and you would play it to defeat the boss and get the reward. However, what they didn't anticipate would be that everybody would try and play this event. So the event started in starting in Southern Cove. But the first event, which was the Karka invading Lion's Arch, happened in Lion's Arch, and I remember playing that and having so much lag that I would press the button 1, and it would take around 45 seconds to actually do the action. It was that amount of lag, and it eventually happened. I got some rewards for it. The end story arc, which was an event going on in Southern Cove, and you killing the giant Karka, which is the one you see at the bottom of in the lava. That's the one we actually defeated during the event. That event was a very interesting learning experience for ArenaNet, because from what I am aware, I completely forgot about it when I logged in, and I forgot to log in, and I was like, oh no! It was an hour after the event had happened, and I thought, damn it, I might just be able to catch the end of it. So I log in, and I get into a server, no problem, and it's like, and I was, oh yes, it's still going on, and we're like pushing the champion Karka, back to its nest, and I was like reading some of the chat messages, and they're like, we've been going an hour. I'm like, whoa, I might have just managed to get in it right at the end of the hour, in the end of the event. However, another hour into the event, so 2 hours from the beginning, this event still was going on. And from listening to other people, they got booted out of the event, they lagged out, and so then they tried to rejoin, they struggled to rejoin because they couldn't get in, and it was a major pain. And I was actually one of the servers that managed to defeat the champion Karka. I didn't get a precursor out of it, but because of the amount of problems, which I thought was a very good piece of PR from ArenaNet, they gave everybody a precursor. And it really, for me, I didn't even realise that it was in my mailbox and sitting there for about 6 months until I actually went back through my mail and was like, oh my god, I've got a precursor, which happened to be the precursor for Quip, but that wasn't the great. It was a nice chaos gun, but I mean, Living Story 1, for the first one, I mean, that had to do the story arc to do with Kanak, and obviously the very first story continued all the way till the end, because he was still in jail when the Scarlet story arc happened. So that was the start, and then you had Flame and Frost, and the Molten Alliance. You had eventually to the Toxic Alliance. The Aether Blades, and out of all the particular content that was provided, all the Living World updates, there are a few that really stand out as one of the more enjoyable ones, more memorable ones. But I mean, if we look at the all the Living World content that they've created since the launch, so you had the Secret of Southern Cove, talking about when you first introduced to Lady Casimir, Inspector Kill, you had Subdirector Null. That's when as I said, Kanak was introduced. There was a lot to do with that new map, and going around. There was a few activities to do on Southern. And then you were introduced to Flame and Frost, and how the introduction of Braham and Rocks. And you had a few little living story missions that instances that you did during that. You managed to get a title for that as well. The Avenger of the Dispossessed. So that's what the living content tends to do: give you a new title. An incentive to go for that type of content and play the content. The next one was one of the more successful ones, which for me was one of the most obviously it was a new map. It was the second newest map that was created, and that was the the Bazaar of the Four Winds. And the amount of detail that went into the map for the Bazaar, the variations, the fact you had to attune yourself to an element to progress up the map. I mean, it was really, really enjoyable. Then you had Sanctum Sprint as well. I mean, that was I really, really enjoyed that little mini game. And that was it was the second map, which was it was only the third update they did, the third Living World patch, and within the 3 Living World patches, Living World updates, we'd had 2 new maps, Southern Cove and the Bazaar of the Four Winds. I can't remember what it's actually called, the actual name of the map. And so we were it was surprising that was the only thing that was new, considering that they look, I don't think they would have been working on it from launch. From before launch, these Living World updates. Would they have created Southern Cove before the game launched? Maybe. But yeah, then you had an update again to do with the Ellen Keel and Evan Nashblade storyline, where you got to vote. You were actually involved in determining who would actually become elected to the Captain's Council. Were you a Keel supporter, or were you an Evan Nashblade supporter? And it was interesting to see how it was very, very close in the end. I think it was like 51 to 49%. But yeah, again, it involved the community of the Guild Wars 2 to support, to pick someone, because there were benefits to picking Evan or Ellen Keel. And then they introduced Tower of Nightmares, which was a big update to the mapping, which was just off the top of my head, that was Kessex Hills. It was updated, and yeah, again, it was a really interesting design, pretty much a dungeon instance, and this was where we started to see the problem with Living World. When the Tower of Nightmares happened, and I managed, obviously there was different stages, you couldn't actually get into the Tower of Nightmares at the beginning. I managed to get into, when you were actually able to get into the Tower of Nightmares, I managed to go and complete most of the objectives within 3 hours of doing it. I played it straight away, got right to the top, defeated the boss, and I was done. And there was very, very little incentive for me to go back and to go back and do it again. And it tended to be, if you missed that opening few days, if you went, say, 3 days down the line, there were very few people playing the Tower of Nightmares and the Living World content at a later date. The Nightmares Within. We did get some new later maps with the fractals, where they added some of the Living World dungeon content. They included back in fractals. Obviously we had a few seasonal events to do with Halloween and Winter's Day, but again, these were updates. Halloween and Winter's Day, I imagine, would have been pre-planned before launch, and again they are going to be reusable ones. We also had the Dragon Bash, again that was an interesting event that's going to be happening year on year. And we had the Super Adventure Box. Not my personal favourite to play really, because I'm playing Guild Wars 2, not an old classic game. That was just my opinion. Loads and loads of people enjoyed Super Adventure Box, and I can see how it's very appealing to people. It just wasn't for me. I didn't really particularly enjoy that. But yeah, that was just that was my opinion. And then later on, you had the living updates to do with Scarlet, the Queen's Gauntlet, Clockwork Chaos, Twilight Assault, involved in the Twilight Arbor dungeon, and to do with the Nightmare. But Queen Jenna's Jubilee, I think the Queen Jenna's Jubilee and the Queen's Gauntlet, that was very, very, very enjoyable. I mean, it was a bit of a Zerg fest, because when you went down to the main area and you were fighting around, killing all these bosses that spawned so quickly, and you got so much loot. But it was interesting to see the one-on-one content where you'd fight a boss and defeating the champions, and how it was all about the major boss at the end and how hard she was. I unfortunately was never managed to achieve that boss. I didn't really play it that long because I knew how long it was going to take me to beat the Liandry, or the correct pronunciation there. But yeah, so that was just a quick overview of the living content. But if we look at the content and we decide, is it, what has been the pros as opposed to the cons of these updates to the living world? If you look at the actual volume of updates we've had over the past year and a half, compared to say Guild Wars 1, the volume of updates and living story is almost equivalent to an expansion. Okay, there isn't anywhere near as many maps as what Factions or Nightfall or Eye of the North brought into Guild Wars 1 that the living story brings into Guild Wars 2. But current maps have been updated. Lorna's Pass when the Marionette came down, Keswick's Hills. But it is interesting to see the volume of change, the volume of living world updates. I mean, if you look under the hero tab, under the achievements, in the historical tab, there's actually around about 28 different historical living story updates. I mean, that is a hell of a lot of updates since launch. I mean, with these amount of updates, Guild Wars 2 has to be one of the most updated games out there. Okay, not just for patches and fixes, they regularly create new content. I mean, if you think back when they were first brought in the living story, it was sort of once a month. It started off with the Karka event, and then a few months down the line they brought in the next start of the living story, and then once they had a certain number of people working on the game and the living story, they were churning out new content at a regular pace every 2 weeks. They also look at balance in the game, bringing in updates and fixes. Think about the current April update that's going to happen. I mean, they probably could have brought that out over since January, but I'm guessing they knew the living story was going to end and they wanted to have something to really bring in the living story season 2 with. I mean, with every 2 weeks we get brand new content that nobody has ever done before. I mean, that's staggering for an MMO every 2 weeks to have brand new content. I mean, compare it, as I said, to Guild Wars 1. You buy an expansion, you play the new campaign, you complete it within a month, say, if you're an average player. But then what else is there to do? Alright, you do have the elite content. If you look at Factions, or let's take Nightfall, you have the Domain of Anguish. Factions, you had the Luxons versus the Kurziks fights. But there wasn't anything new that was coming out. Once they brought in the expansion, that was it. Nothing happened unless they update the actual skills or create some bug fixes. There was no new content until an expansion. Okay, as I mentioned, there are the seasonal events that happen: the Winter's Day, the Halloween, the Dragon Bash, and the odd Easter and St. Patrick's Day sort of thing. I mean, there were many skill updates in Guild Wars 1, but maybe once a month, if that. You know, that they try and fix certain builds. I mentioned in the previous video about in Guild Wars 1 with my ritualist, when suddenly became a hell of a lot more powerful when they brought in, you know, they updated the Signet of Spirits. It's just a skill they updated. But when you compare it to Guild Wars 2, Guild Wars 2's developers do have much more, you know, they are more interactive with the community. I mean, I have to say, I use the forums so much more in Guild Wars 2 than I do in Guild Wars 1. The forums are very well laid out. You can see where the developers are talking and replying. It's very, very clear. But I have spoken, you know, these are some of the positive aspects of the living story. So what about the negatives? So let's discuss, why do people still want an expansion? You know, what was it that people really truly disliked about you know, the living story? Well, one of the main criticisms was the temporary content. There was nothing new. You only get the remnants after the living story. Take Lorna's Pass, you have the marionette still there. Southern Cove, you've just got the, you know, you might have seen earlier in the video, the Karka that we killed. Lion's Arch, I'm sure Lion's Arch will get fixed up within the next 6 months. Keswick's Hills has gone back to okay, there's this, you know, the remnants of the Tower of Nightmare, but they're still back to the same old map. If you came in, if you hadn't played since launch and you came in, there is only Southern Cove. It's a brand new map. The rest are all slightly, maybe a couple of changes here, a couple of changes there. Nothing is new. Okay, alright, maybe LA's at the moment, but there's no new map content. People get bored of the same maps. You know, the only new permanent map we've had is Southern Cove. And, you know, you may have seen the footage in the background. I was doing a few Karka events in the Karka Queen. I mean, the Karka Queen very rarely gets done. It's very few people actually tend to visit Southern Cove. Because I don't believe it's a very well laid out map. It's not the easiest map. It wasn't designed to be. It is level 80 content. But people just, it's not exactly the thrillingest map to visit. Why do you think the Karka shells are so high on the trading post? Then you also had fractals. I know it's technically not living content, but it was new content they brought in. They updated the number of fractals there were, but there was just lack of interest due to the same fractals. They didn't bring in leaderboards, which they said they were. You know, they have limited choice. Why they have so many dungeons? Why not just throw in one of the dungeons that they already have? You know, in fractals, why could you not suddenly be in Twilight Arbor, you know, the Aetherblade Path? Okay, admittedly they had the ending on that in the fractals, but okay, Citadel of Flame. What about Path 3? Can you imagine having that thrown into fractals? Or Ara? Can you imagine one of the last levels of fractals being an Ara level? Whoa, that would suddenly throw things up a bit, and you could change the rewards you get for it. Because then a lot more people would be like, okay, yeah, let's do fractals. And if you imagine, I don't know, as a suggestion, if you're one of the higher levels for fractals, that the higher the level you are, you could get token rewards for it. Imagine if you were level 40 or for fractals, and you ended up, say, the final dungeon being the final fractal being an Ara level. I would suggest giving if you complete the level, getting 100 tokens for the Ara shards of ore, not shards of ore, the tokens of Zaitan, and just something new to just spice up fractals, because I've got a bit bored, to be honest, of fractals. If you look at the Eye of the North dungeon book, they had the hero book and the dungeon book. They had 18 different dungeons of varying difficulty. There were some that you get the runners doing, and there are others that took a lot more time and were much more difficult than others. And it was a great variety of dungeons. But is temporary content such a big deal? The issue is it's not a big deal for people. if they go on holiday for 3 weeks, oh, suddenly they've missed it. You know, people know that if they're going to miss it, they're not that fussed about it. And people want to see new maps. They want to come back in and see, whoa, there's like a whole new area that I've got to go and explore. Okay, I'm going to really dive back into it. You know, there are a lot of players that they dip in, because Guild Wars 2 is a free apart from when you purchase it, it is free to play. There is no subscription. They can dip in and out of it. But there is a huge amount of the map that is unexplored. There are so many places that we want to revisit from Guild Wars 1, or even in places like Guild Wars 2. Look at the Blood Legion Citadel, we haven't even visited there. I mean, they could have included that with a living story. Have Rox go to the Blood Legion Citadel, and you have a map to get there, and then it's another, a home zone. That would have been fantastic, and a great part of the living story. There's just something permanent wanted. If I logged in for the first time for 6 months, do I care that Kessex Hills has changed? There is a bit of apathy for the living story. It was just, okay, I'm going to complete it to get the achievements and the special reward. That was it. However, is this the main issue? I personally believe it is a main issue. The second main problem has been the villain. The amount of hate towards Scarlet, it was ridiculous. I didn't think she was that bad personally. She wasn't the greatest villain. Towards the end, the writing got a lot better for her. But people, I believe, want more than just temporary content with a villain that they knew ArenaNet once the amount of bad feedback they had way back last year to do with Scarlet. They knew that they were going to have to stick with her. And I think ArenaNet do love the Sylvari a lot. However, considering that the two main people that the Guild Wars 2 community do not like are Traherne and Scarlet, both Sylvari, does seem to be a trait that seems to be following. But they could use, the fact that Leaving Story Season 1's ended, use Modromoth to bring in an expansion. The Maguma Jungle, the Isles of Jandhir. There is so much new content that they could develop. And can you imagine now, they have the living story and every 2 weeks you get a new map as you push to find out about Modromoth. That would be amazing. That would be such a better way to bring in the living story. Well, look, this is my opinion on this. I've listened and read a lot of the things on forums and videos about what people believe of the living story. I do believe that the living story is something different that ArenaNet have tried out, and there are elements to it that are very, very impressive, particularly about the volume of content that they've brought out. But personally, I think it's time that they need to focus and bring out an expansion, bring out a whole load of new content, but I'm prepared to wait and see where they go with the Modromoth and Season 2. But did you enjoy anything specific about the living story? Was there anything that really, was there something that really annoyed you, apart from Scarlet? ArenaNet are learning. They do need to tweak the living story, but if the living story does continue, what one thing would you ask ArenaNet for? I think you know my answer. It'd be great to hear from you. Thank you very much for listening and watching, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.